I'm Jonathan Larson with TYT Investigates. And if you're not familiar with The Family, the secretive Christian group based in Washington, D.C., or just outside Washington, D.C., aka the Fellowship Foundation, you may have seen, if you didn't see our reporting about The Family earlier this year and in the latter half of last year, you may have seen Netflix had a miniseries documentary about the organization, dealing primarily with their history, their roots, anti-labor, all of this, anti-gay incidents and backing. And the thing you should know about The Family is that it is ostensibly not just bipartisan, but nonpartisan. It is Jesus plus nothing. The idea is that Jesus comes before everything, including partisanship, all of that. So, and they are the sponsors since, I believe, the 1950s of the National Prayer Breakfast. And if you're not familiar with the National Prayer Breakfast, every February you will see, almost every time, every year, the President of the United States show up at a breakfast and give a speech, and lots of famous names and powerful people are there from the United States and from other countries. And so this Netflix documentary sort of laid out the history of this organization and what it does in the name of access to power and support for power, regardless of moral considerations. And some of the reporting we did, I talked to Jeff Sharlet, who's the author of the books, I should say, that the documentary series was based on. I interviewed him actually for TYTI Daily after the fact and shared with him some of our reporting. And the way he characterized it was that we had sort of picked up where the documentary left off. And I'll post a link to some of our reporting. What I will share, I'll go through some of it briefly, and then I'll explain why we're talking about it today. Although obviously February is coming up, so that's partly where I'm going. So among the things that we found out was that the family was funding congressional travel to countries overseas where members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, were meeting with anti-gay leaders in former Soviet countries where Vladimir Putin would very much like to have anti-gay sentiment take root, because that will block their entry into the EU. The EU has requirements about what your laws can and cannot say in terms of LGBTQ rights. So if you foster anti-gay sentiment in those countries to the point where it's institutionalized, that's a barrier to them joining the EU, which Vladimir Putin would be very happy about. That was one of the things we revealed. We also revealed that on one of those trips, there was a Republican congressman named Bob Aderholt, and the FBI revealed that Aderholt had met with lobbyists who were secretly working for Paul Manafort. Manafort hired them to lobby for Ukrainian oligarchs. What we found out was that when Aderholt went to Ukraine on the family's dime, while he was there, he met with not just the lobbyists that the FBI said he met with, but the guys who were paying Manafort, the oligarchs themselves. We reported that. We also reported that the longtime leader of the family, although they don't like to refer to themselves in hierarchical terms, a guy named Doug Coe, who recently died in 2017, had essentially been replaced by a faction that was considerably, or at least believed to be considerably more openly partisan than Doug Coe was. Doug Coe was praised by people like Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, former Senator Bill Nelson of Florida, a Democrat. Doug Coe made a genuine attempt, whatever his personal politics were, to be inclusive of Democrats of every political stripe. What we found out was that we found out a few things. One is that the money behind the family seemed to be coming in large part from a gentleman named Ron Cameron, who is the head of a Delaware poultry company, which has, as you might imagine, something of an environmental track record when it comes to ammonia in the air and fecal material getting into the water supply. So there are air issues, water issues, all this stuff. And people in that area are not super happy about the company's track record or the enforcement track record in Delaware. Now, it turns out that Cameron is a GOP megadonor. So much so that he watched the 2018 midterm results at the White House with Donald Trump. This is the guy who's now appears to be bankrolling the family, the Fellowship Foundation. He gives to Republicans, I was going to say left, right, and center, but that wouldn't be true. He gives to Republicans all over the country, not just senators and governors, but down ticket as well, down ballot as well. Except in Delaware, where his company is. And one of the senior senator from Delaware is a senator named Chris Coons, a Democrat. Chris Coons is an openly religious man, Christian, who has also been a co-chair of the family's National Prayer Breakfast. And we actually, he would not speak to us, so we actually had a freelance reporter do one of those classic ambush moves where you show up at the prayer breakfast, stick a camera in the man's face and say, we're going to ask you questions for 2 minutes until you run away from us, which is exactly what we did. And one of the things that Coons told us, despite not wanting to speak to us at all, was that he is, quote, concerned about the perception that the National Prayer Breakfast, quote, is a partisan event. He's concerned about the perception. Yesterday, Coons and his past co-chair, Jim Lankford, a Republican from Oklahoma, gave an interview. They sat for an interview. I don't know when they did the interview, but it aired yesterday on Face the Nation. And one of the things that they revealed was that they're not co-chairs for this coming breakfast, but that there are co-chairs in place, only they didn't name who. So after our reporting last year, I didn't even mention the other thing we learned, okay? You may remember that the FBI revealed that the Russians were trying to use the National Prayer Breakfast to get connections with people in influence. Well, what we reported and found out, thanks to your support, was that not only did the family, the National Prayer Breakfast leaders, give them tickets, give the Russians, Butina and her handler, Alexander Torshin, not only did they give them tickets to say, here, bring whoever you want, we found out that a Christian charity, nonprofit, out in Seattle that's affiliated, very closely tied to the family, actually reported expenses in their tax forms related to having the Russians show up. In other words, the family paid to have these Russians come there. So we've found out all this stuff. The family was already controversial. Obama came under fire for speaking to the family because of the family's involvement in anti-gay legislation in Uganda. And when I say anti-gay, I mean it was like killing people for being gay. The family denied it, but there was still some uncomfortable connections there. That was before all of the stuff that we've reported. That was before the Netflix documentary came out this past summer, which I learned a lot from myself, and I'd been pretty knee deep in this stuff. I do have interests other than Pete Buttigieg. So what we learned from this interview yesterday is that there are still Democrats who are willing to provide a bipartisan veneer to this organization. We know that the guy who gave Butina the tickets, who was also employed by the nonprofit that paid for them, he's on camera being a Trump fan, okay? That's in addition to the mega donor who watched the returns at the White House with Trump. So essentially, the nonpartisanness of the family, the Fellowship Foundation, has been severely eroded. And by the way, in response to one of our requests, the family itself said they released to us a new policy about inviting guests, who you can invite, money changing hands, things like that. So it seems like on some level they wouldn't answer questions, but they did seem, at least internally, to acknowledge that there have been some issues here, or at the very minimum, a perception. After our reporting, both Ro Khanna and Ted Lieu, progressive congressional Democrats, they distanced themselves from the family and the National Prayer Breakfast. And the question now is, which Democrats, if any, are still going to be willing to be a public face for the National Prayer Breakfast? Coons seems to be one, still. We don't know who the other Democratic co-chair is. I did a quick little Google. As far as I can tell, it has not been announced yet. So what I would say, what I would ask of the TYT army out there is this: call your member of Congress, email your member of Congress, both in the House and the Senate, and please politely, please with the assumption of good faith, simply ask, can you share with me what level of participation, if any, you expect to have with this year's National Prayer Breakfast? And let us know what they say. You can email us if you want to be super discreet about it. You can email us at theyoungturks@protonmail.com, or you can tag me publicly with, what should we do as the hashtag for this? How about hashtag Democrats and the Family? So you can hashtag Democrats and the Family with what you find out. You can tag me. I'm at JT Larson on Twitter. You can tag at TYT Investigates on Twitter. We'll see it. We'll boost it. And if it says that they're, if you're making a specific claim, we'll do our best to verify it. If it's someone who says they're actually going to be in participating in the breakfast, lending their name to the letterhead, the masthead for the invitation, any of those things, obviously we're interested in knowing, and we'll make the follow-up calls and get them on the record. If you get an email and you can post it, screen grab it and let us see, even better. The more documentation you can provide, the better. So that goes for your senator and your member of Congress. I would love to see everyone sort of chime in with hashtag Democrats and the Family, with which Democrats, if any, are continuing to lend support to an organization that on the surface, not on the surface, beneath the surface, appears to no longer be a nonpartisan organization to whatever extent it ever was. And I should add, by the way, that Jessica Skarain is a progressive candidate who is challenging Chris Coons for the nomination for Senate. Chris Coons is up for re-election next year. And she has said things like she won't take campaign donations from corporate political action committees. Coons, I should add, has gotten donations from the poultry industry, of which, the mega donor is a driving force. He's a big part of funding the political action committees of the poultry industry. Jessica Skarain has said she won't take those donations, and she's a progressive compared to Coons on other issues as well. Coons, of course, calls himself a progressive, but anyone can call themselves a progressive. But you should ask Skarain too. If you're in Delaware, find out whether she's willing to lend her name, lend her imprimatur to the National Prayer Breakfast. Same with any candidate going this year. It doesn't have to be just the incumbents. It can be anyone who's running. Would you attend the National Prayer Breakfast? There's a record of anti-LGBTQ activities and funding. There's a record of lack of transparency when it comes to their work with Maria Butina and Alexander Torshin. There's a record of partisan targeting of politicians, including, by the way, Bill Nelson, who Ron Cameron, the mega donor, went after hard. I'll post links to all of these articles if you're interested in going back and checking out what we found out. But I'll close. I'll take your questions, but I'll close by before we go to questions by asking again. Ask politely, civilly, with all assumptions of good faith. Is your representative or your senator or the candidates, are they planning to still or newly lend their name and their face or their imprimatur to the family, the Fellowship Foundation, and the National Prayer Breakfast? And then hashtag us at what you find out, Democrats in the Family, at JT Larson or at TYT Investigates. And follow us on Twitter so you can see what we come up with. And if you don't already, I hope you'll subscribe to TYT Investigates here on YouTube, like and follow us on Facebook, and we'll get back to you if we end up getting any response, any feedback from anyone. As I mentioned earlier, Ro Khanna, Ted Lieu, they both indicated that they would not be participating anymore. I don't know whether that's the case this year or not, but any movement we see one way or the other, anyone that you can nail down that you find out, please let us know. All right, now with that, I'm gonna see what you folks have to say in the comments. Let's see. Okay, and that's another reason to subscribe. If you're new to this, the reason I ask you to subscribe, I mean, the obvious reason is to make our numbers look big, is to increase our numbers. But the substantive real reason is that then you get the notifications so you can be part of the conversation, which I get a lot of utility out of and I enjoy and all of that. So Punks for Progress says Jeff Charlotte is a badass, can confirm. Jess says good morning. Alice Murphy says good morning all. Nice to see a lot of the regulars here. Bonnie Hell says, or Helly says, happy Monday. Thank you, Bonnie. James Stark says this nation is going to destroy itself over greed. That's really bad. I hope that doesn't happen. Jess says, oh my God, I've watched that series, The Family on Netflix. OMG, creepy. Caranola says, hey Hart, Jonathan Hart, tuning in. Japan's got holidays from today through Friday. That's the way to be. That is the way to be. And there's a part of me up here that's on holiday. So I'm with you, Karen. Betsy Clausen says, hi there from South Africa. Hello, South Africa. Thanks for joining us, Betsy. Nathaniel Earl says, good morning and Happy New Year's. Generic 2858 says, hello, everyone. I can't tell if that's a face bomb or a wave. I think it's a wave. Jess says, the family has their tentacles reaching all around the world. It's beyond scary. Caranola says, that family so irritates me. We, the people, need them and that damn breakfast out of the White House by law. Punks for Progress says, oh man, Jay, I assume he means me, you have no idea how happy I am to hear that you're going to be focusing more on the family. So I don't know that I'm going to be. I have had this nagging itch because it's coming up in February again. Should I focus some more on that? And I don't know to what extent I'm going to be able to, which is part of the reason I'm asking for help from you folks, right? Hopefully the groundwork that we laid, the groundwork that Jeff Charlotte laid, that should provide a meaningful resource for Democrats considering whether to participate. And by the way, if you decide to participate, you're allowed, right? It's not a crime. But then let's have that discussion. Let's be transparent about it so we can interrogate what is your thought process? How do you reconcile your participation with the stated mission of the National Prayer Breakfast, which is supposed to, by the way, ostensibly be beyond Christianity. People of other faiths and no faith do attend. How do you reconcile all of that with what we know about the people who are actually running it? Chris Coons told us, oh, he's not really involved with the vetting, sort of suggesting, well, that he can't be accountable for it. Well, then don't participate, maybe. Or at least explain why it is you're okay participating when the group has clearly funded shady activities and activities that have boosted the anti-LGBTQ movement, if not here, then overseas. Jess says, at one point while watching The Family on Netflix, I became so disgusted / angry, I had to stop watching. Reptile Z says, hi peeps, what did I miss? I assume peeps will let Reptile Z know what they missed. Jess says, they are also indirectly responsible for the genocide of the LGBTQ plus community in Africa. I think that may be overstating what we do know somewhat, but there does appear to have been a role there. Alice Murphy says, Jess, I haven't watched it, the Netflix documentary. I'm afraid of the rage I'd feel. It would make me literally sick. I was raised evangelical, and now that I see it for what it is, it makes me so angry. And I want to be clear that I'm not endorsing a view of evangelical in any sense as being derogatory or necessarily negative. Obviously, I believe reason is better than faith, but evangelical doesn't necessarily mean bad person, just so we're clear. And I don't mean that because some of them are liberals or whatever. It just, okay, all right. Jess says, yeah, I had to watch it because I needed to know about them and have the knowledge so I know what to do to fight back. Well, let me know if you know, Jess. Caranola says, I cannot believe Eisenhower opened the door to these cult critters. This was the first National Prayer Breakfast that Eisenhower sort of endorsed by attending and speaking. I wonder if it was these family guys who put under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't remember exactly the time frame, whether that predated it. Excuse me, I got the sniffles today. Francis Wolf says, hi guys. Betsy Clausen says, saw The Family on Netflix. Now I know who is in charge of the chaos in South Africa. I saw in the movie they even have people in Africa. James Stark says, I just called and got hung up on just for asking. Who did you ask, James? That was fast. TYT Army, man. Bam! Bam! You are out there. That's inspiring. James, let us know. Give us some details. Pear, Theron, I'm not sure how to say your name, Per. Theron says, hi, y'all. That's quite the Swedish accent you got there. AG says, hi. Reptile Z says, JL, please repeat the Proton address. It is theyoungturks@protonmail.com. And if you want the entire communication to be secure and or encrypted, I don't remember which it is, then you need to send the email from a Proton Mail account as well. If you send it from a regular Gmail account to us, the Young Turks, at protonmail.com, doesn't count. Francis Wolf says, man, it's hard to catch y'all now that I'm in California. Wait a minute, it's almost 9 in the morning. It's 10 to 9 in the morning. It can't be that hard. Although maybe schedule-wise you're commuting. I don't know your deal, Francis. I shouldn't judge. I'm sorry it's hard for anyone at any time, and I appreciate that you're making the effort to be here. So ignore the first part of me grousing about your complaining. Please accept my empathy and apologies instead. Alice Murphy says, the problem is that nothing I see will surprise me. I know how they work, and there's nothing you can do to change them or what they believe to be their mission. Well, there is. There is something you can do. You can find out whether your elected representatives participate, have a role, have communicated, whatever, and then ask those representatives to be transparent about that. Release whatever emails they have, tell us about whatever communications they've had, discuss their reasoning for participating with this group. Maybe they don't have a problem with what the group has done. Maybe they're entirely comfortable with people not knowing who's running it and who makes the decision about who to place next to, in the chairs next to people in power, right? Because that's what's going on. People, we don't know who, are getting chosen by we don't know who to sit next to our elected representatives. What do you guys have? You guys are doing some deep history on who added the pledge. I'm not seeing who said, oh, Caranola says it, that under God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954. Reptile Z says vote for Pedro. Jess says the mission wouldn't be to change anyone in the family or connected to, rather the mission is to elect those that refuse to meet with them. Francis Wolf says, y'all need to be calling the Senate. I've been harassing mine all week. Fair trial. Referring to the impeachment, I assume. James Stark says, do you believe that a second civil war is our only option left? I do not. If we cannot muster, no pun intended, the civil forces to accomplish change, I'm not sure who if people aren't going to show up at the ballot box, they're not going to show up on the front lines with a musket. Jess says, everyone please like the video. And honestly, is there anything more important or profound that any of us can say than please like the video? Please like the video. Ian Sutherland, thank you, Jess, for reminding folks. Ian Sutherland says, glad that the prayer breakfast is not a thing here in Canada. Don't be too sure. They've got a presence in lots of countries, and I'm pretty sure Canada is one of them. You may not have it institutionalized at quite the national level that we do, but I'm quite sure that they have some kind of presence, and it's not top down at all. A lot of these organizations are very sort of free floating and autonomous with only loose connections. That's part of what makes it effective. Alice Murphy says, I'll be contacting all of the Democratic senators and representatives to find out who not to support. I assume you mean yours, Alice, and not all 535 members of Congress. But I hope you will let us know. Hashtag Democrats and the Family, at JT Larson, at TYT Investigates. Let us know what you find. Especially, screen grab if they're responding by email. Sorry, I'm very sniffly today. Hadija Brahim asks the family. So I don't know how much of an explanation I gave at the beginning of the video, but there is a decades-old group which has gone by a number of different names. The International Foundation, I think it was, the Fellowship Foundation, and sort of informally, the family. And they were extremely low-key. The leader for several decades was a guy named Doug Coe, who wanted zero visibility and thought, in fact, that they operated and were most effective. They operated best and were most effective the more invisible they were. In the wake of his death, they've become a little bit less invisible. There was a documentary about them called The Family over the summer on Netflix. We did a number of reports, which I've discussed with Jeff Charlotte, the author of The Family. He actually was inside for several months a couple decades ago. So he saw that world from the inside. My reporting was largely based on tax documents, talking to sources, things like that. So I was definitely on the outside, more current, where Jeff Charlotte is drawing on his personal experience a couple decades ago, maybe 15 years ago, I'm not sure offhand. Okay, let's see what else we got here. And then I gotta go. Hadija Ibrahim says, oh yeah, exactly, I remember that family. Yes, that's the one. Alice Murphy says, remember to like this video. And really, again, I can't stress enough, is there anything more important than liking the video? There is not. Reptile Z says, great stuff, crowdsource in order to create a broader base from which to leverage towards transparency. That's getting stuff done. And look, it's a little bit of a cheat, all right? I'm not paying anyone, and there you are doing actual real journalism. So it's a thin line, and sometimes there's no line between crowdsourcing and exploitation, right? You would think, you would hope that a journalistic outlet with the resources, the Washington Post, the New York Times, would put a battery of interns on and say, here's your script, call everyone in Congress, and we'll be done in a couple days. They're not doing it, as far as I'm aware. Ken Klippenstein and I are not capable of doing it ourselves. So we ask for help, knowing that to some extent we're asking you to do for free what journalists should be getting paid for. So there's a trade-off there that I'm not super comfortable with, but I hope in the act of being transparent about it, I render it such that you can make an informed decision about what your own moral role in that dynamic. Francis Wolf says, yes, they love The Family in Africa. AG says, not red versus blue, 1% versus you. Jess says, The Family believes that Trump is the chosen one and has convinced Trump of the same, evidence being that Trump literally said it. I actually think Trump was taken out of context in that quote where he said chosen one. I think he was referring to, he was the chosen one to do something specific, like, I don't remember what it was, like fight the Federal Reserve or something like that. Or maybe it was have the trade war with China. I just, when I watched the entire quote, I thought the messianic thing arose from taking it out of context. So I apologize if I'm wrong, but I think it's important that we be careful about not going to the maximalist interpretations of badness when there are mitigating circumstances. Francis Wolf says, new Burn app coming this week. James Stark disagrees and says, it is red versus blue. Caranola says, that is right, Julie Hart. We don't want to forget all the suffering and death in bringing the spirit of the Magna Carta to reality since 1215 now, do we? Mr. Elder says, Hillary Clinton and others are saying Bernie has a good chance to be the nominee for the general election because he keeps going up in the polls. James Stark says, I have them on speed dial. I assume he's referring to the members of Congress, because James, if you missed it earlier, referred to having already called to find out about representatives' participation with the National Prayer Breakfast. Rapid Burrito says, blessings for all. I ordered those glasses, by the way, LOL. I believe it was Rapid Burrito who asked me about my many years old frames recently. Ariel Apuhi, I'm not sure how to say the name, Ariel, I apologize if I'm getting it wrong, asks, do you think The Family will ever go away? I do not, but that's okay. The question is, how much influence will we allow it? And how susceptible are our civic engines towards non-accountable, non-transparent influence? That's where the efforts need to go, I think, not anti-family, but pro a better system. In Cenk's thinking, my boss, Cenk Uygur, that means like no money in politics. I happen to disagree with him on the tactical side there, but that's a very clear prescription that Cenk has. AG says, it's a class war. Sherry Addis says, breakfast got in the way of my TYTI time. Francis Wolf says, thanks, JT. We love you too, man. Thank you, Francis. Love you back. Love you guys back. James Stark says, it's us versus the racist fake Christians. So I actually take that as a slur against non-Christians. A real Christian is capable of doing bad things. Just for the record, if you do a bad thing, that doesn't mean you're non-Christian. That means you're a Christian who did a bad thing. The alternative is that being non-Christian is worse than being Christian, which to my mind is a slur. I realize that wasn't the intent, but I think it's important to catch these things even or especially when that's not the intent. Mr. Elder says, I cook breakfast while watching TYT Investigates. Great, that's awesome. I love that. Now we got some burritos going here. Sherry Addis says, wow, this sounds juicy. I'll have to go back and see what I missed. Thank you, Sherry, for catching the whole thing. Reptile Z says, only 18 likes. Let's get busy. And I see we're now up to 55 likes. So I don't know what you did, Reptile Z, but I like. Caranola says, that's right, Jonathan. We need to out the names putting these family next to our elected officials. Patsy Stone says, everyone please get active in your community and register people to vote in the primary of your state or go to your caucus. And do the research, right? Know why you want that candidate. Know what policies they support. Be able to explain to the people you're trying to mobilize how policy affects their lives and how the politicians you support will affect those policies. Jess says in the docuseries on Netflix, they show a map of the world where the family's tentacles reach. Very scary. And again, one thing to keep in mind, it's very fragmented. There's not a lot of central top-down order giving or marching orders that are going out. So just, it's not quite as conspiratorial in the classic sense as you might be inclined to think, but to some extent that makes them more effective. D. Scully fleshes out something I was getting at, which is he or she says, wondering whether the family will go away would be like wondering whether any Christian denomination will go away, or I would say any religious denomination. He says these are theocrats. Theocrats will never stop fighting for theocracy. And I don't know that I would say, I mean, look, when you get to the hardcore family leaders, there's an absolutely theocratic element there. But I don't want to cast that net so widely as to say that any Christian is a theocrat. I firmly reject that notion for what it's worth. Hope G says the family, like the Netflix special, if you're just catching up, that's the one, Hope. Yes, exactly. Thank you for joining us. Bosfuss De Bruyne says U.S. citizens need to demand a democratic process. Yeah, that would be correct. Patsy Stone says, tell the people who don't know about the family to watch the Netflix show about it. Saves you from explaining. Well, it's like a 6-hour series, so I feel like I could do a little bit of explaining rather than say, go watch the 6-hour documentary series and then finish this video. But thank you for that, Patsy. Punkster Progress says the family, while espousing a clearly heretical version of Christianity, again, I would disagree. Just because it's bad doesn't mean it's not Christian. Says its main purpose is to maintain a global patriarchal capitalist status quo. It's a control mechanism that only exploits faith. Well, that's maybe a semantic argument. Is what you do in the name of faith exploiting faith, or is it a natural, a logical conclusion of what faith requires? If you believe in something, like to me, the weird Christians are those who believe you're going to hell if you don't believe, and then don't try to convince you to believe, right? If you think a building is going to explode, you do your best to get everyone out of the building. Someone who says, yeah, I believe that building's going to explode, but you know what? I keep my beliefs to myself and live and let live. And then they walk away and kaboom. That to me is weird. Caranola says, yes, Jonathan, got to watch where these family exist. Got a few popping up in Japan on occasion. Canada's got to have way more popping in. Doug Grinbergs says, message to community, share facts, info, connections on Wikipedia, Little Sis, CMD Source Watch. Jess says that reporter is awesome. Jeff Charlotte, he's written 2 books on the family, as well as, I believe, was an executive producer and participant in the creation of the Netflix series. Mr. Elder says, we may get a climate reporter added to TYT. Please spread the word. We are looking for people to do investigative journalism related to climate policy, related to climate money, related to fossil fuel money, all of that stuff. Please spread the word. Send them my way. Hope G says, I remember watching that, but forgot there's so many layers to U.S. politics, LOL. That is correct. Caranola says, in the wake of that family leader's death, we've got the internet outing these critters, including us. I would say we're part of the internet. Sherry Addis says, that's right. We can't sit back and rely on others to do stuff for us. Jess says, and of course I immediately lost it. Jess says, come on, where are you, Jess? You guys are on fire today. I lost you. Jess, where are you? Jess says, how money in politics affects climate change. Indie journalist for TYT. That's right. That's what we're looking for. James Stark says, Donald, no, I'm not going to say that. Hope G says, is that only avenue going directly to your congresspeople, or better to push for money out of politics and a Voting Rights Act to strengthen your democracy? Sherry Addis says, yeah, Jonathan, that's why he looked up at the sky. Are you referring to Trump during the eclipse? Francis Wolf says, I know climate change and how money in politics affects it. TYT too strong. Thank you. Caranola says, I'll bet ratifying that 28th Amendment would cut a hell of a lot of funding to that family. Is ratifying the 28th Amendment, is that the Johnson Amendment? I can never remember, keep that stuff straight. Ariel says, I don't mean so much that they will completely go away, but that they won't have as much influence on our government. That, I think, is a variable. That's a real variable. And which way that goes and how it goes, that's up to us. D. Scully says the solution to the problem is literally civics education. Civics is where the knowledge of how to continue our society is passed down to children. A supermajority supports democracy when educated. Hope G says, because there's a lot of billionaire special interests influencing your political processes aside from just the family. Ariel says I pronounced their name right. I'm glad to hear it, but I'm not going to try again. But thank you, Ariel. Hope G says, that's why if I were American, my first order of business would be focusing on fixing your democracy to mitigate outside influences. Yeah, I have complicated thoughts on that. To me, whether the influence is inside or outside is much less important than on our immune system, right? Sorry, got to sneeze here. It won't matter whether the influence is coming from the inside or the outside if we are focused on the right things and we know our epistemology enough to weed out what's true from what's not true and what matters from what doesn't matter. Francis Wolf says fascist Christians is what Hedges calls them, and that's not an oxymoron, right? You can be a Christian and be a fascist. You can believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, died to redeem our souls, and also believe in a fascist system of government. You can. Believing that Jesus was God, is God, doesn't mean you also are morally perfect. In fact, your entire religious ideology is built on the premise that you are so bad that some poor guy had to die for you. That's how bad you are. So the notion that you being Christian makes you good, no. James Stark says, real Christians care for people as I am a Christian who supports people's rights. And again, James, I'm sorry, I would disagree with you. There are real Christians who do not care for people. I understand the point that people are making about the idea that if you truly embrace the best New Testament tenets, then you will care for, the least of my brothers as much as you will for me. But that's not the definition of a Christian. You can argue that's the definition of a good Christian, just as it's the definition of a good person. But Christian is a purely, I posted something C.S. Lewis wrote about this the other day, where he compared it to being a gentleman. The term gentleman did not start off as a compliment. It was a purely descriptive term. It told you what class someone fell in. And then it sort of morphed to become a compliment. Oh, he's a gentleman. What a gentleman he is. That's not how it started off. We shouldn't let the same thing happen with Christian, because if Christian becomes a compliment as opposed to a purely functional description, then non-Christian is now an insult. I'm not a Christian, and I would be insulted by that. Cheeky897 says, great job. I really appreciate your hard work. Thank you very much, Cheeky. I really appreciate your appreciation, especially because I never feel like I'm working hard enough. So thank you for the compliment. I am terrible at taking them. I don't think I've seen you around before, so welcome. And I should warn you, I am terrible at taking compliments, but I do very much appreciate the sentiment behind not just you feeling it, but taking the time to express it. It means so much. It really does. Thank you. Reptile Z reports snow in Minnesota. We've got rain here on the East Coast. D. Scully says civics education diminishes the number of authoritarians in a society because with civics one understands that rightist policies destroy the quality of life for citizens in a democratic society. Mr. Elder says that's where getting big money out of politics comes in. It will have to be done with an amendment. Francis Wolf says, yes, we do appreciate you, JT. Thank you very much, Francis. Hope G says, even supporting people running who opt out of taking corporate campaign donations is a way of circumventing that. Sherry Addis says, isn't it infuriating that people will do evil in the name of religion, something that cannot be proven or disproven? Yes, of course, but people will do wrong, I would say, in the name of lots of good things that have nothing to do with magic or the supernatural. So I don't think, as an atheist, I don't think anyone should embrace an argument that, and I'm not saying you're making this argument, but it's tempting for people to fall into this trap, this notion that religion is the root of all evil. It is not. We've got a lot of work to do figuring out how this thing works. And religion is just one piece of that. Francis Wolf says, I gotta say I missed you. Thank you, Francis. Ken's cool, but we are a hungry bunch. Hungry for knowledge. He doesn't have the time or he's shy. Well, that's very kind of you to say that Ken is cool. He is, in fact, if you go by Twitter followers, he's like 10 times as cool as I am. But so thank you for throwing me a little love on YouTube. Thank you, Francis. Weeby Sauce says Trump 2020. I need a verb there to figure out exactly what you're trying to say. Is that a warning or a promise or a prediction? I don't know, Weeby Sauce. So let me know. D. Scully says, I didn't say that every Christian is a theocrat. Thank you for the clarification. 2/3 of Christians are leftists, rightists, or authoritarians, i.e. their political ideology is categorized by political scientists as theocrat. And one thing I would say is that I think it's a mistake to think that all of these classifications are very hard-baked. I think a lot of people, their commitment to a specific ideological or even religious position is relatively thin and pretty easily moved by top-down leadership, by social and cultural forces. So however bad the numbers are, I don't think that should necessarily mean that despair is our next step. Reptile Z says, all religion is an exploitation of faith. I'm not sure the difference between religion and faith, but I'm not sure I should get into that here and now either. Sherry Addis says, Bilbo Baggins wasn't a MAGA rat, he was a socialist. Ulfric Stormcloak says, I take it the family refers to Clintons, just got here. So the Clintons, Hillary certainly, were close to Doug Coe, or at least, I don't mean to suggest they were intimate friends or anything like that, but they had a relationship. They knew Doug Coe, the former leader, the late leader of the family, for sure. Caranola reports it's 60 degrees in Tokyo now when it should be 40-ish. Climate change is real. Punks for Progress says, I didn't say bad, I said heretical, big difference. True, that's absolutely true, but in common parlance, I think heretical tends to have a negative connotation to it, much as you and I might dig a little side dish of heresy. But my larger point being, Punks continues, the family itself only uses as opposed to embraces the faith they espouse. I think that's true. I have not come across anyone in the family whose faith in any way struck me as false. I watched videos of people that were not meant for general consumption or widespread, just them talking about their faith, having what seemed to me genuine, earnest, heartfelt discussions of what faith meant to them and didn't mean to them, and how it helped them, and how it could help others. I saw enough of that to think that to recognize that there was nothing that I had seen to make me question the reality of their faith. Again, you can be faithful and in the name of that faith do things that you believe serve that faith and end up doing bad, right? The Crusades, I believe, were undertaken by at least some people who were genuinely moved by their faith to go and save people from eternity in hell. That's a good motivation to save someone. The problem is, it's based on a factual premise that you are not entitled to. So you end up killing people to save them from a hell that you believe in. Doesn't mean you weren't a person of faith throughout every single step. Okay, I'm going to have to go soon, guys. D. Scully says, Jonathan, it is actually kind of disturbing to find grown-ups talking about freedom of and freedom from religion. You shouldn't have to justify or explain yourself. It's sad. I agree. I skipped a few, I'm afraid. Lots of hearts and kisses from Karen to myself and to Johnny Lars and Kenny Clips, I should say. D. Scully scolds me, saying, Jonathan, learning political ideologies is actually important. It's actually necessary in order to determine whether you are supporting a pro-democracy candidate. The terminology is hard-baked. Ignorance of terminology is no excuse. Our political ideologies are woven into our identity, so the things for which we advocate are deep and abiding, even when people lack the language necessary to categorize it. Francis Wolf says, grifters all, man, from old man Graham to Trump. And again, I disagree. And I think assuming that they are operating in bad faith is not a useful explanatory mechanism. I just don't. Mr. Elder is defending video games, which, by the way, I'm sympathetic to. Punks for Progress says the upper echelons of the family are singularly focused on oppressing the poor for Machiavellian purposes. The lower level people may actually be firm believers, but that will change as they gain power. Again, Doug Burleigh was one of the people whose videos I watched. He's relatively high up, relatively influential. He's the guy who met with Maria Butina, gave the Russians tickets. He was at the head of the Seattle nonprofit that reported expenses related to bring them over. I have no reason to doubt Doug Burleigh's genuine faith, for what that's worth. Okay, so I'm going to thank you and sign off. And this is about religion, and I'm an amateur atheist, so I enjoy these discussions maybe disproportionately to others, but I'm also happy for any chance to demonstrate that I'm not entirely obsessed with Pete Buttigieg. So thank you for that and for the great conversation. If you don't already, I really hope you'll subscribe to us here at TYT Investigates. We are growing. More and more people are watching us every day, which is just really gratifying, and it gives me hope that we can have a discussion about things without assuming bad intention or bad faith by everyone on the other side, which I think is a necessary avenue for us to get to a better future. So that's my self-serving way of tying my subscription numbers to the fate of the nation. So I guess that means if you love America, subscribe, something along those lines. I don't know. My point is, thank you very much. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. I think I'll be doing this again tomorrow, but not on New Year's Day. So if I missed you tomorrow, we'll see you on the back end on Thursday, either myself or Kenny Clips. And either way, Happy New Year if you celebrate the New Year on the Roman calendar. And as I said before, we'll see you again. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. Bye.